Our first impressions was this was the worst place we had ever seen. The building was inadequate, messy, in some places dirty. The staff practices were not acceptable by our standards. And whenever we expressed concern at those practices, they would tell us that we didn't understand mental health. That's the way they did things. There was little interest in getting things better. They wanted compliance, but they didn't want to change their practices.
Welcome to the Westminster Tradition, where we are unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Royal Commission. My name is Alison Lloyd-Wright. I'm a recovering public servant and a managing director of the Good Trouble Group. Joining me today on Kaurna land are my two fellow recovering public servants, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And Danielle Elston of Good Government Advisory.
Hello, Alison.
So before we begin, I just wanted to say thanks so much for all the feedback we've received from our user survey, as well as the frankly epic amounts of input we got for our recruitment episodes. We will be publishing our recruitment mini-series after we finish this mini-series, which is on the Oakden aged care scandal. Your feedback has been so useful in helping us work out what to kind of dial up and dial down as we plan our episodes out for this year. And so we chose our topic for today with some of that feedback in mind. In particular, we receive feedback from public sector managers who have no interest in executive positions, who want to hear about things they should know and understand about what's happening on the executive side of house. We also receive feedback that people are keen for some more deep dive investigative episodes, and they'd be interested in some more state-based examples. So taking that on board, today we're going to deep dive into an SA-based scandal, Oakden, a tale of systemic elder abuse of severely mentally ill South Australians over the period of about a decade, from 2007 to 2017. During that time in that facility, residents were over-medicated, roughly handled, directly abused and assaulted, and there was more restraint and seclusion used in that single facility than in all other older person mental health facilities in Australia combined. A decade of inattention ended when a brave family advocate pushed for an investigation of unexplained bruising on their loved one, and a receptive chief executive of the local health network commissioned an independent inquiry by the chief psychiatrist into practices at the Oakden facility. Caroline, what did that inquiry find?
Well, look, in the end, the chief psychiatrist found that Oakden was more like a mid-20th century mental asylum than a contemporary aged care facility supporting people with severe mental illness, and recommended its closure.
Can I jump in early, Caroline, which is the issue of the word mental illness? So my memory of Oakden is most of the residents had dementia.
Yeah.
And not to be a pedant, but to be a pedant.
Like, at what stage have any of the three of us not been pedants? Continue.
But dementia is a neurological condition, not a mental illness. And the framing is really interesting. I suspect that framing ends up falling out into what line of the service you end up in, whether you are in aged care or kind of health and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I just want to early pin that dementia is a neurological condition.
Yeah, I know. And it's why it's
not,
SA Health
not in
providing.
the DSM, it's not a mental health condition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is why, you're exactly right, it's why it was an SA Health facility, because rather than mental health and the Commonwealth do aged care.
Now, this took down a minister, didn't it?
Well, it's interesting because I've remembered that it took down a minister, and then when I went back and read it, it's actually the minister resigned when the commissioner, the independent commissioner against corruption, announced that he would be conducting an inquiry into this. The minister resigned for ill health, which is not the same as resigning for being in charge of a facility that's being investigated by ICAC. Anyway, so ICAC conducted an investigation. They found maladministration on the part of 5 public officials and 1 public authority, the Northern Adelaide Local Health Network. Lots of staff were sacked, many more were suspended. No execs went down with the ship, we're saying. Service was closed in July 2017, prior even to actually the release of the ICAC report, and all patients were transferred to alternative locations. So we'll talk about lots of different things, I guess, in these next coming episodes. But there were kind of 3 different kinds of lessons that really stuck out for me. So one, today we're going to talk about this missed opportunity in 2007 where they did a big crisis response and tried to fix things up and did a pretty good job, and then
it stopped being a crisis and...
that. Next
For a minute.
Yeah. The next episode, we're going to talk about the operational impacts of government's will it, won't it outsource Oakden that went on for 15 years and led to pretty systemic under-resourcing. And in the final episode, which actually probably got the hardest content in it, we're going to unpack the dangers of kind of things that are a long way away and hidden from more general mainstream view, and how did that little subculture stay secret for so long. So that'll be the final episode. Anyway, so today's episode, we're going to look at a missed opportunity right at the beginning of this 10-year period, which is in 2007 when the Commonwealth Aged Care Regulator says to the South Australian government, we may not be able to accredit your facilities anymore. So maybe I'll start with a little bit of background, if that's
Please
okay. Thank you. So the Oakden Older Persons Mental Health Services opened in 82 when we were just bubbers. And it was open for about 100 people, for older people with mental illness, mostly advanced dementia. And usually we're talking about people whose behaviours are so acute that they can't be supported in kind of mainstream settings.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It was originally located on a campus with a hospital, so it kind of wasn't on its own. It had a hospital, but they closed the hospital. So then you end up with this kind of closed...
It became even more small
Yeah.
in some ways.
and isolated and outposted from
Yeah.
the rest.
So you hear families, for example, talking about showing up and thinking they've gone to the wrong place because they think they're at a derelict facility. And then you go further down the driveway and you're like, oh, no, these 3 buildings are still open even though the rest of it is closed. So, yeah, get a bit of a sense of that. In 2000, the state sought accreditation of 2 of those 4 wards as aged care facilities. Why do we think they might have done that?
Oh, is it because if you're not an accredited aged care facility, you can't get money under the aged care system?
Yeah, it was a way of getting cost shifting to the Commonwealth. So, and they did that.
Shifting to where? Anyway, whatever.
Yes, we might be. Yeah, but they did that. I think without doing a proper assessment of kind of how much it would actually cost to become an aged care provider, because they kind of missed out the fact that previously these have been kind of hospital wards, but once you become an aged care provider, you are providing a bed for life. And so what happened in particular in these 2 wards is you went from a kind of trying to support people to kind of manage their symptoms down so that they can go back into mainstream settings to warehousing people until they died. That became the kind of function of those 2 wards. And look, even in its earliest days, it's pretty clear that SA Health didn't love what was happening at Oakden. It was kind of not consistent with that big 1990s National Mental Health Reform Agreement, which was all about removing institutions.
Yeah, care in the community and...
Exactly. This is not that, right? This is institutions. And there were also kind of intermittent plans, which we'll talk about next episode, to outsource Oakden to the NGO sector at various points in time. So look, things were tricky. And then you get to December 2007 and the Aged Care Safety Authority says non-compliant with 25 out of 44 standards. There's a duress alarm that doesn't work and you're about to get your accreditation squashed.
Which is a huge issue for state governments. I mean, so leaving aside the context of Oakden, one of the top 5 embarrassments for people who operate bits of state governments that are accredited, particularly by other parts of government. So hospitals are also accredited. Like there's all sorts of parts of government that are accredited by federal.
Yeah, I was just thinking RTOs. I've been in places where we ran RTOs.
And so if you run a bit that is accredited by the Commonwealth, the just embarrassment, I don't think there's much kind of fancier way of saying it, of a state run. So, I mean, state governments will be like, oh, that private provider's losing its accreditation or that not-for-profit. If the lights...
Shameful.
If the lights are on you, it's a big deal.
Exactly right. And
it should be a big deal.
Oh, sorry.
Because it's
100%. It's a big deal.
Of failure.
Yeah. But it is like there are some things that set off alarm bells. Does not matter they will always set off an alarm bell, and that is one of them.
Yeah. And in fairness, and it's a good minister who was Minister for Mental Health at the time, a woman called Minister Gail Gago. She is shocked when she hears about this, and she is very responsive to this. And so you can see sort of that they really – and it feels like a very corporate-led response. So, but, there's a very comprehensive action plan put in place. They add in a senior consultant psychiatrist. They add in a senior nurse. They add in an OT, a psych. They increase the number of nursing staff. They're fixing that duress alarm. You can tell the minister's office is calling like every week saying, where's the tradie, what's going, it's a very tightly.
There's a lot of eyes on, not just, yes, we're fixing the alarm, but like, show it to me, send me a photo or
Exactly that. They also engaged some dietitians to review the nutrition at the aged care facility. The findings are, just to say, shocking. They find that almost 2/3 of residents are moderately or severely malnourished.
Oh.
Yeah. Grossly inadequate fortification of texture-modified meals, no system to ensure residents get the correct meals. Residents requiring finger foods are provided with pies and pasties at all meals. And those dietitians talk about it's the worst they've reviewed in 25 to 30 years of practice in aged care. So things are grim.
I'm glad you added that because I just was interested in the context because malnourishment in aged care is a
problem.
Is a constant challenge.
Yes.
Even in well-run facilities, they will be constantly challenged by some of this. So I'm glad that you have that
malnourishment in dementia patients in particular.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So yes, much worse than you would expect. So they've kind of done the thing where they've mobilised the resourcing to come at it. Like, it sounds reasonable as a response if you're a minister.
I think not just if you're a minister, but were I faced with the same sort of set of circumstances and as an executive more in the centre, that seems like a very reasonable plan of action.
The thing about the accreditation is it gave you a list. You had the list, and so you were not confounded by what's the problem and what's the solution.
Yeah.
So you mobilise everyone you need to make sure that everything that the accreditor has decided is important is done.
And I think, when I looked at it, I just thought about the salary cost of all of those experts that they put in, and it really reminded me, I've been in workplaces where people say there's no money. There is always money.
There's always money.
Like, if you are in crisis, they will, I don't know where they found the money. Maybe they just overspent, right? Maybe they just accepted an overspend, but it was worth it.
Yeah. All expenditure and, in fact, any number of other government decisions are trade-offs.
Yeah.
There is always something you are willing to trade for something else of a higher priority.
Yeah, and this has gone to the top of the list and they've mobilised the resources. But even with that, it's clear that it's not smooth sailing even at this part, right? So in January...
look, I'm sure we'll get there. But I just still have, is it the right provider? So they fixed the accreditation. I can see...
No, they haven't. They're on it. They're trying
But I suppose what I'm saying is I can see that that's exactly what you do. We've not got it. Here's our list. Let's go. But that's a tiny bit of, are we in the right space? Is the model right and all that stuff?
Well, and that's exactly the right question, Danielle, because what happens in January 2008, some of the external consultants they brought in to review it in December withdraw because they say, we're not convinced that local management is actually interested in the answers that we're bringing.
That's a big deal for a consultant.
Isn't it? It's a really
just as a different aside, to say, well, we could keep giving advice, getting paid, turning up to these quarterly meetings, and we could just keep doing that though, right?
Yeah. Keep getting paid.
To say, I don't want to take your money if you're not going to take the advice is not a small decision for a consultant, I don't think.
And I suspect people realised that it was raising flags from some of the things that happened later. But also just to say they clearly weren't being precious because similarly, one of the psychs that was appointed as part of this kind of urgent inrush to do behavioural assessments, she presents on the 21st of January to both local management but also local health network managements like corporate management about her significant concerns that management were not responding to the recommendations. So you've got kind of lots of separate people saying they don't respond to the recommendations. And it's a cultural thing as much as anything, because the people running Oakden are hospital people, right? Like they're running it like a ward, and these consultants are saying, well, no, you're running a home.
Yeah, you're running an accredited aged care facility.
Yeah.
It needs to be run like an aged care facility.
That's right. Yeah. So there's like a kind of mismatch between
purpose. Like what are we trying to deliver?
Exactly. And so the CEO of the local health network is no fool. And so she sort of says, look, we don't usually run aged care facilities. And so she says, but I know this guy in Melbourne who does it. And so she engages some Melbourne-based specialists to come in and do exactly what you're saying, Danielle. Like how is this set up? Is it set up for success? What do we need? And the Melbourne specialists spot the problem from a mile away. So their report, which they produce very quickly, says a number of successive changes to governance means it has not been a focus on the core business of aged mental health care, residential care in particular. It needs high-level clinical and operational leadership, but this has only been recognised by the organisation itself in December when this accreditation was failed. So he's like, there's no governance, there's no leadership, no one has thought in the agency we need to make sure this is working. And his recommendation is a single point of accountability for delivery of the service, which I note is the same recommendation made a decade later by ICAC, which tells you that it wasn't implemented at the time. So we've got this report. It nails the essence of what's going on. You've got this service that's kind of running, but they don't know how to do it. It's not really part of their normal world. They're kind of trying to fix it up. Things aren't getting better. And so things aren't brilliant.
And plus it's out on its own, not visible to anyone, no one's visiting it regularly, out of sight, out of mind. Mm-hmm. So they've worked out what's going wrong, and you've given us some foreshadowing here that there were some things they maybe didn't fix. Mm-hmm. How did they try?
So
what did they fix? What didn't they fix?
Yeah. So, you're still in this accreditation crisis, right? So the Commonwealth regulator's coming back every month or so and checking in, and the duress alarm is still getting fixed. Everything's still getting fixed. They don't fix the governance, but Minister Gago on the 1st of April, she does the thing that she has the power to fix it quickly. She directs the agency to partner with an expert residential aged care provider. And they do this so quickly. She directs them on the 1st of April. They issue the EOI on the 2nd of April, and they have literally tendered, and the people start 2 weeks later.
What does partner mean?
Good question, well asked. So they contract them to come in and share the kind of the daily running of the facilities. So they have staff on the floor. They have ACH staff on the floor. Okay. They're they're doing some of the governance and routines. They kind of are setting it up, I guess, is the sense that you get of it. They do this and they get their accreditation back. So in August 2008, 4 months later, the head of ACH writes to the head of SA Health and he says, look, gains at Oakden remain vulnerable. And there's a need for substantive continuing action around the culture at Oakden. So I really recommend that you fully transfer the facilities to us. So that's what's said in August of 2008. But by October, he's withdrawn that offer to take over the running of the facility and agrees to the partnership continuing. And from a paper trail perspective, everything goes quiet for 3 years.
Vulnerable is an excellent word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gosh, isn't that well described?
It's the first thing that I just think of reading that. What a perfect way to craft it, where you've solved the immediate thing, but you are aware that without all eyes on it, that you haven't really fixed it or something. And in the face of the kind
of cultural deficiencies and, that it's
I'm thinking
at
of
risk.
Lots of situations where you've gotten past the crisis.
Yeah.
But it remains vulnerable, and I wouldn't have thought of that as a framing. I like it.
I keep wondering, what are you saying when you say that? You say, I want to take it over with my organisation because I think with with greater clarity and control, I can do it, right? Like I can get rid of the bad eggs. I can impose the culture I want to impose. You know,
you'd have accountability. I keep going back to this partner. I'm like, who's in charge then? Who's in charge with the partnership? Are these guys just floating? You could probably do it this way, and that will get your accreditation. Do they have power? Do they have? Who's in charge?
I think that is exactly the thing that isn't quite defined, right? So the offer to take it over is fascinating, and then the withdrawal of the offer 2 months later. And then I can only imagine, and there's nothing in the record to sort of talk about it, but I imagine the withdrawal of the offer is like, God, this is a high-risk thing for me to take on, right? Like if I'm an NGO in that space, I can see why maybe you'd be like, maybe I don't want to take on this.
High risk and expensive.
Like maybe the money didn't stack up. Anyway, yes, so ACH stay partnering for 3 years. So by April 2011, this contract they have to partner expires and it's not renewed.
Interesting.
Yeah. And at about, I think it's May 2011, they receive the first long-term accreditation from the Commonwealth that they have. So they get 3 years from there. So, in fact, this is like this kind of missing moment. So from 2008 to 2011, you've got this ACH partnering, trying to hold things together. 2011, they get a 3-year accreditation, ACH leave. And so essentially no one's got eyes on for those next 3 years. Yeah. Now, when you look back at it, knowing what happened in 2017, it's extraordinary that the department let ACH walk away, right? Like
Why did they? Do we know?
No. And so Minister Hill, who was the Minister for Health at this period of time and who Danielle and I had a brilliant conversation with on a previous pod episode, he's asked this by the Commissioner, by ICAC, and he said, look, I was told they weren't interested in doing it anymore. And I think, like, I look at that and I just wonder, was it really hard?
Yeah. Especially if they weren't in charge and couldn't do what needed to be done around the culture and some of the other things.
And no one's sort of asking them to stay on, right? No one's saying, oh, please, we'll give you whatever backing you need, or like clearly
I don't see what was in it for them. And I don't mean that in the sense that NGOs don't often do things so there's nothing in it for them.
Yeah.
Because they do. But just it's hard. I can't imagine that the numbers stacked up in a way that at least they felt like they were getting a good budget return or anything.
Yeah.
They're not in charge, but they probably feel morally responsible.
Yes, which is a really icky
awful place
and they may not have been welcome.
I think that. I really think
Imagine turning up every day to a place where you're like, it's like you're the consultant or the kind of the nosy police or the do-gooder.
Yes,
I know better than you.
The do-gooder. Yeah, I really think that. And there is a minute sort of that they surface in ICAC land where they sort of say, we're confident now that we know how to go forward. And I think...
Well, that's what I was going to suggest. Is it that they thought, yep, we've learned everything we can from ACH and we reckon we've got it from here?
Yep. Yeah,
we've got the accreditation.
Why would we need to kind of keep this partnership with this?
Away we go.
Yep.
Yeah, so that may well be what happened.
Also an opportunity there for someone to say, okay, well, that's another big change after the big thing that happened 3 years ago. And I don't want to say review because God knows we have a whole podcast about reviews of things and we have a whole podcast that includes how sometimes that doesn't lead to change. But there's an opportunity there for government to say, well, that's another shift and change. Yes. What's the risk management? Can someone go in and just say that it's going to be okay?
Yeah.
Look, that's not the sophisticated
version. How has accountability changed? Like
yes.
who is now in charge of that? Are we? Yeah, none of that seems to have happened.
Right.
In fact, the chief psychiatrist report in 2016 finds that what did happen is that Oakden developed a culture of making periodic attempts to meet different accreditation standards, even if they were barely met, rather than embracing a culture of continuous quality improvement. The focus was on ensuring that staff knew what to say during accreditation rather than knowing how a service should provide high quality
So we're
care.
teaching the test, we're not.
Exactly right.
Yeah, which is not wildly uncommon in accreditation outside of aged care, right?
Yeah.
It's not wildly uncommon in anything where we benchmark.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you create an incentive.
And that's it shows me as well, I think.
Hard to know what alternatives
that there
are
was
and all
a
that stuff, but-
misreading of what the crisis was about. So the misreading, I think, from SA Health's perspective was the crisis was not meeting the accreditation, not we were running a terrible substandard facility that didn't have the culture of quality that we're looking for. Like they really missed
The framing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Step back bit.
Yeah.
So you started this episode by saying that one of the things that our listeners want to hear more of is what was going on for managers versus what's going on for executives during these kind of moments of crisis or failure or scandal. Any reflections from that question from you, Caroline, or you, Danielle?
Just that management. So one of the things I noticed about here is management seem to have a lot of power. So this idea that you get in a report and a consultant and ACH and everyone saying management won't do X.
Yes.
And before I go any further, I have been reflecting on this over the summer. Middle management in government is the hardest job going around. I think it's harder than executives.
100%.
I honestly think you are sandwiched with a lot of
All
responsibility.
responsibility, no control.
Yeah, right. So
I don't know why I sung that.
I was going to say, I don't remember that from play school, but thank you. Noni Hazelhurst. Is that it is the hardest job going around. So can I preface this with this is not tipping a bucket on middle management, and for our middle management listeners, like all responsibility, no control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There does seem to be
we
like
see
lots
you,
of
we feel
actual
it.
evidence though that middle management at the very least didn't have the skills. So if they were getting the advice and they didn't want to do it because they didn't have the results, there's reasons for it.
Yeah.
They seem to have a lot of power to say no in a way that some places have that all through government. Other places, a bit more held to account. But one of my things here is that they just seem to have a lot of power.
Yeah. Yeah. And that the executives, I think it didn't feel like the executives were able to be hands-on in a kind of, you didn't hear about an executive going and sitting at Oakden, for example, and like being part of that solution. It was delegated out to all of the external people, bringing the external people in to do the fixing. And I wonder, like,
swings and roundabouts in culture across the board, though, right? Like I am seeing more and more this idea of executives going and sitting somewhere that might be difficult. Like the physical moving around of senior people in every jurisdiction is high at the moment. Doesn't matter which portfolio. I'm not talking about aged care or anything else. I would say the period that we're talking about is very low for both senior people and even ministers going out to visit departments.
Yep.
Like it was very much a write a brief, send it up.
yes.
Again, not just South Australia, not just health. Across the board, we go cultural swings and roundabouts, and there's a lot of feet to the fire of ministers, advisors and seniors at the moment.
Have you been out there?
Yeah. Like, well, if that school's in the paper every 5 minutes, what was it like when you went and talked to the principal? Like, which I don't think were conversations. I think cyclically, that was not really how we were thinking at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Well, and it's kind of the mirror of what Danielle just said, but like there's something for me about how easily the executives mobilised resources in this case. And I feel like if I was a manager, I would be like, fuck you. Like I have been doing this thing on a shoestring and holding the line on not spending more and doing it in the way. And now that we're here, you can find space for another 5 FTE and a consultant.
I've been asking every year in the whatever budget process for more, and every time you say no, but now that it's a problem.
Yeah, now I get the money. And it's funny because one of my previous jobs, I had a really big distributed workforce, and we were really tight financially across that workforce. So like there was always a kind of request for more money on PD, for example. Like we had this kind of famous notional $100 on PD per staff, which is like wildly inadequate when you're doing the things we were doing. And I remember being able to be like very generous in the specifics when people asked me for stuff. And afterwards I was like, God, that must piss my managers off, because I make my managers hold this line of their budgets and then I get to like sprinkle fairy dust on the big thing. So that's just a bit of self-loathing and shame about but it is a lot easier to mobilise resources as an exec. And I feel like it was great that they did it here, but also, to Danielle's point, they sort of didn't look at it and think, why am I needing to do this? Or how do I make sure that we don't need to do this again? Or like, I don't know, there's just something there.
And then I guess my
How can I
themes-
know this sticks?
Yeah, well, that.
Absolutely. I guess my themes were going to be kind of similar to yours, which is I've done a lot of crisis stuff over my career, and God, we're good in a crisis.
Very good in a crisis.
Very good in a crisis. Very collaborative. Everyone can work out what they can give up and,
Yes, that's true.
what resources they can bring to bear and how quickly they can do things. And it's really hard to have that mentality outside of that crisis. And once the crisis has moved on, whether or not the core problem has been solved, which almost inevitably it has not, then you're just back to trying to manage whatever you've got left. But the other, I guess, core issue that goes to what both of you were saying was the tendency to solve the wrong problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like the problem is we didn't get accreditation, so let's fix that. Not is the problem actually that we're in the business of doing something we shouldn't be in the business of doing.
Yeah.
And how do we encourage at management and executive levels when we're high on the adrenaline of the newspaper report about the accreditation? How do we encourage that zoom out that Danielle's talking about, right? That kind of strategic step back to say, before we rush to solving the problem.
Yeah.
Because also you get to be an executive in large part often because you are good at solving problems.
Yes.
So how do we stop from rushing to solve the problem and start to ask the right questions about what the problem actually is?
I was like listening to you and then listening to you, but you just nailed. Like, I was like, this is all about adrenaline, like so. And then you threw out the adrenaline, which is like adrenaline is something you can't live with all the time. And professionally, you get a lot of adrenaline once your area is dumped on the front page of the paper, but adrenaline does not last forever.
Yeah.
And we don't really have a post-dopamine, post-adrenaline strategy for executives. Like it's like once it's gone, it's gone.
And it's not just executives, I think it's politicians as well.
Yeah.
Like having worked on a couple of things where the kind of the core problem, we sold the thing to someone that didn't have an owner, but the core problem about why it not having an owner was a problem.
Yeah.
Was
Maintains.
never, still persists to this day. But it was no longer a political issue at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just in any wrapping up thoughts on this one or hints about where we're going in the next episode?
Well, just I think here's a hint, Alison, because you say, did they think about the strategy? And here's a hint. They did at various points think about the strategy, but for various reasons didn't make a decision about that. So that's where we're going next episode.
Amazing. And finally, in 2025, we are starting a new tradition, which is gifting a Westminster Tradition mug to the best listener question, or post on LinkedIn, or some kind of engagement with us that just really tickled us or made our day. So for our inaugural Westminster Tradition pod mug winner, we want to...
Drum roll!
That's a drum roll. That's also how Caroline types, for the record.
So rude.
We want to finish with a shout out to David Harris, who sent us a LinkedIn message about listening to the pod with his sister and fellow public servant and having a discussion after they'd each listened to about what they learnt and what they liked and didn't like. It warmed the cockles of our hearts because it makes real the idea that public sector nerds are a family and that a lot of the learning we do is in conversation with each other. So please keep your stories and feedback coming along, particularly if you want to be in the winning to win a coveted mug. Find us on LinkedIn or email us at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Till next time.
Upper management expressed a lot of concern, said they would do anything. They'd give us all the resources we needed. And they did. At our first meeting, we had more people than we had ever seen before at such a meeting. We had a sort of a boardroom full of people. But none of them had any experience or knowledge. One occupational therapist came in with a whole lot of books. And she said, well, I didn't know anything about dementia. So I went to the library last night and got all these books. and read as much as I could last night to bring myself up to speed.
So were you surprised by that response?
I was flabbergasted. Resources are not just numbers. To us, it's about competence. And competence to us is a mix of knowledge, skill, and attitude. And in this group, we found a couple of people with a positive attitude, but by and large, most had a poor attitude, and nobody had skill and knowledge of aged care.
And have you seen anything quite like that before in a facility like this?
Never.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions, or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.